What's up, everybody? This is Ricardo Rodriguez.
And Matthew Messick.
And this is
the Profits Over Wages podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Profits Over Wages podcast, where we do weekly interviews with highly successful business owners and entrepreneurs. We discuss life, business, and entrepreneurship to bring forward the lessons learned from success and failure, and most importantly, have fun while doing it. On episode 55 of the podcast, we sit down with Anatoly Nirshberg. He is the Director of Operations for HAUS Mortgage and a Managing Partner at both Paradigm NEXT and BizCast HQ. All around great guy doing some amazing things in the mortgage industry. I'm excited to release this episode and I hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoy doing the interview. Without further ado, Anatoly Nirshberg.
First of all, I want to thank you, Anatoly, for coming in and doing this interview, because I know you do a lot of things that are pretty awesome. For those of our listeners who aren't familiar, tell us what you do, who you are, and what you do.
Sure. I'm the Director of Operations for HAUS Mortgage and also the Managing Partner with Paradigm NEXT and BizCast. Paradigm NEXT is a brand identity agency, and BizCast is a media company that really focuses on middle market leadership. And HAUS Mortgage is a mortgage broker and direct lender, currently licensed only in Illinois.
So we've actually been working a little bit for like the last few months, and I don't know, I've just been really impressed of how open you guys are and how you are like giving us a lot of value, and then I don't know, it's just been like you just give, and we're talking about HAUS Mortgage and doing stuff with BizCast, right, which is like the media side of things. Mm-hmm. And I kind of just wanted to talk to you about that because like it's very, I think we talked about it the first time we met. It was very like Gary Vee-ish with a jab, right hook, right? Like you give as much value as you can, and then eventually it's more like a long-term relationship. You're going to get it back in return.
Have you always been that way, or is that something that came up at some point and you were like, this is how I want to live my life and my businesses?
I have not always been this way, unfortunately. I'd love to say that I have, but there was a pivotal moment. I kind of grew up in the mortgage industry, and it wasn't until my late 20s, early 30s that I got out of the mortgage industry, and I got into a completely different space, into kind of the startup marketing, ecosystem. And I realized that the way that I had been doing things and the way that industry worked as a majority, I can't speak for everybody, but as a majority, the way the industry worked is it was all very transactional. Mm-hmm. And then you talk to these VCs, you talk to these startup founders, and you're seeing that there's a lot more value creation on that side of the equation. Everybody talks about the need to create value for those around them and the whole, pay it forward movement and so forth. And I realized that it's a better way to work. Let's not even get into a better way to live, but it's a better way to work. If you do things without the expectation of doing anything in return, then you're a lot more open in the things that you do. You're a lot more candid. The things that you do, you're not always thinking through of how they're going to tie back in to what is it that I'm going to get back from it. And as a result, the results are usually better.
Yeah. Let's go back there, because when we met, like you told us that, like we had something in common, right? And that was that we immigrated here from a different country. Like we both weren't born here. And do you want to talk about like where you grew up and all that stuff, and like kind of like give a little bit of context to what you're doing now?
Sure. So I grew up here. I grew up in Buffalo Grove, went to everything from elementary school on. I was born in the former Soviet Union. I spent the first 8 years of my life there. Then it was kind of a staggered immigration at that time. Everybody that was immigrating, it wasn't a direct flight here. You went through Austria, you went through Italy. It was like a whole process to get here. So when I got here, I was 9 years old. And, I had to grow up quick. From the moment we left Russia, had to grow up quick because the parents had to have multiple jobs, and you had to be on your own. And not only you had to be on your own, but you had to, at the age of 8, 9, actually start helping your parents, whether it's having some kind of a little job that you do, that you help financially, or at least you take care of your own toys and so forth, to being the de facto translator and negotiator for a lot of the things that they do, things that they hadn't done before. So when they came here, it's a lot easier for an 8-year-old to pick up English than it is for a 40-year-old.
Yeah, totally.
So it started from everything from negotiating the lease on the apartment that we lived in, to their first car, to then eventually their first mortgage. And that was kind of my foray into mortgages, was that I was helping out my parents. Then we had more family come over. helping them out, and helping out, just being in the room, and at first purely translating, but then being in the room enough, kind of starting to figure out what it is that you're looking for, and actually being able to give some advice at a much younger age than I would normally be exposed to it had I not had that immigrant experience.
Okay.
That's pretty cool, actually. I like that.
Just becoming a translator de facto, like.
But no, just being able to, like, I didn't myself really get into business until, like, college. Like, if I would have been able to start, like, learning things, like, earlier, and just, you got head out of necessity, but it was cool because it gave you that kind of experience to put you on a sort of like a fast track.
And that, I mean, in my experience, it's why you kind of see that those first generation immigrants, typically they get a little bit further ahead because they started earlier, because they had those experiences, because they had to try harder. It's not that it wasn't given to them, it's that they didn't know they had to go out and get it. Had they known that eventually it would be given to them, they might have, sat on the sidelines and waited for it to come anyways.
True.
Yeah.
If I had known that, I could kind of sit by, finish college, and coast through that, and then things would be easier, then I would have. But not knowing, and my parents not having that point of reference to give it to me, of how life in America would work and how everything would work out, kind of, every man for himself and figure it out.
Then in being first generation, you realize how much better things are here.
Yeah.
Like the amount of opportunities here, that doesn't even compare to most countries.
And I came here young enough to where I didn't realize it until much later in life. It wasn't until I was 25 and I actually went back to where I'm from. And the first few days I spent in the center of the city, and I couldn't understand for the life of me why my parents had left. It seemed, everything was great. Then about a few days into this trip, one of my mom's old colleagues actually took me out to where we used to live and where she used to work and so forth, and everything became crystal clear. Everybody that was there when I left in '89 was still there in the mid 2000s. Nothing had changed in their life. There was no advancement for the majority of people, and that's when I really started to appreciate what it is, what we have here, and the opportunity we have here. And
it's crazy. I mean, I didn't grow up here much older. I was 15 when I moved here, but I remember obviously a lot more because you're a little more developed.
Of course.
And I see pictures now. I'm like, holy shit. I don't know how we grew up there.
Yeah, I went back once with a friend of mine, and he'd never been back. He hadn't been back in 30 years. And we got off the plane, and the first thing he says, I want to go see where I grew up. And I told him don't do this. Like, settle in, take a look around, then go see where you grew up. No, I want to see it. So we went straight from the airport to the place where he grew up. He was depressed for the rest of the trip. Completely just destroyed him because his childhood memories were not at all in line with the reality of what he got to see.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was shock value for sure.
So did you start a business from there on, or did you do the whole going to college and getting a job and all that stuff, or how did you get your start in business?
I mean, both. When we moved to Italy, we were in Italy for about 6 months, kind of waiting to find out where it is that we're going to end up, because all the immigrants from the Soviet Union at the time, they left with a kind of a direction of Israel, and then if there were other countries and cities that picked them up, that's where they ended up going. So we sat there, we waited there for about 6 months. And when we were leaving, a lot of the advice that was given to the people leaving is, bring trinkets with you, bring souvenirs with you. That's going to be your cash flow through this immigration process. You can go out and sell it. We came to Italy. My dad was an engineer. My mom was a college professor. The furthest thing from being able to actually sell anything. So they realized that day one, I took over all their stuff. They had like a bazaar type equivalent. And as an 8-year-old kid, it's easier, I think, to sell because you're an 8-year-old kid. So I unloaded all of their stuff within, a day or two probably. And then I had a line of their friends that were in the same boat that didn't really know what to do with it.
That's awesome.
And while the older kids were washing windows for cars and doing their own thing, and they wouldn't let me stand anywhere close. I was 8, they were 15. It's easy to get rid of me. I found my niche on the sales side of things, and that was my start. Then when we moved here, I did everything from the standard, mowing lawns and shoveling snow, and even that I brought in the clients, and then I recruited other kids from the school to actually
do the work,
so I could expand quicker, so I could get more done.
Like Mark Twain-ish.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I had to pay them. I couldn't convince them of why it's really fun. But having spray painting numbers of people's houses on their curbs, where I would walk around with a stencil and I would paint a white box and the number with the numbers in black so that as pizza drivers, anybody else pulled up the house, they could find it easier. I started, I was charging a buck per number, and I started where my parents lived. And then after a couple of days, I realized I'm in the wrong neighborhood because all the houses where they lived had 2 to 3 number addresses. So I went, this was in Wheeling, I went and found the neighborhood with 5 number addresses. And that was my expansion plan at that time.
That's funny.
And so I always did something. There was not a moment in my life where I wasn't working and where it wasn't something entrepreneurial. Like I had a few jobs along the way. I developed photos at Motophoto and a few others, but for the most part, I was doing something on the side. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I went to school. My parents really instilled that in me. My mom, again, was a professor, so the education was super important for her. So they moved right away to where there were the best schools. So I finished high school, went to college, did that. Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't pursue any graduate degree. I think, I don't know, maybe I should have at that time. I feel like I didn't get that experience. I'm kind of in the process of doing that right now.
Did you go to school here in Illinois? Or?
Yeah, everything was here. Right now, the pursuing a graduate degree, and that's I'm realizing how much it is that I didn't know when I was in business, when I've been in business for the last 15 years. Mm-hmm. And it's two sides of the coin. On the one hand, it would have been nice to know it. On the other hand, I don't know if I would have appreciated it as much in my early 20s and if I would have been able to instantly apply it to what it is I'm doing.
Right, because you're not really in the correct state of mind if you haven't had the experiences. So, like, I don't know, it's kind of weird. Because, like, I've read books, like, multiple times. Because I've read some books when I was, like, 18 or 20, and I'm like, I don't remember anything. But then I'm reading it now, and I could just appreciate it just so much more because of all the experiences that I've had, over a long period of time.
Exactly.
So that's interesting. And then what was your first business that you started?
Well, I mean, the mortgage. Yeah, mortgage? For all intents and purposes, mortgage. Because I became a loan officer. Back then, you didn't need any licensing to be a loan officer. Anybody could be a loan officer, I think, until about 2005. Mm-hmm. So I became a loan officer when I was 16. And being a loan officer meant I was out looking for clients.
So you didn't need a license before 2005?
Nope.
Anybody could mortgages?
Anybody 2005 or 2008?
2005, 2006, not 2008. Yeah. It was before the whole thing. So right now, it's a federal test. It's federal safe courses and so forth. Before that, it was only specific to Illinois. But it didn't come out till, I'm pretty sure it was 2005. Okay. So before that, I would collect a 1003, and this is back in the day when it was all on paper and it was this long application. And I would bring it to a loan officer who was my parents' loan officer. He would take care of it from there on out. Then I would grab the package, run around, go to people's houses to close them. So I was doing that. And then that obviously evolved. So I had a little bit of experience where I worked for AmeriQuest Mortgage and American Enterprise Bank. Realized that subprime definitely wasn't for me. With the AmeriQuest, that was just a learning experience, let's say. And retail, I felt I was a little bit too pigeonholed into what they were offering, their products. Mm-hmm. And I didn't feel like I was serving the customer best. I think if I didn't have another vantage point when I walked into it, I would have appreciated it more. But after working on the broker side and seeing what was possible, and then being told by the bank, well, these are the three, this is what you have to work with, it was a little bit tough.
Right. Because as a broker, you have access to multiple.
You have, at that time, it was hundreds of lenders, and we worked with a lot of them. And each lender has their own, several dozen programs.
Right.
So you had a lot more options.
Definitely.
And then you said you did mortgage until your late 20s, and then was that like when the crash happened, you made a switch?
So when the crash happened, I had to make a choice on what I needed to do. At that point, I was no longer originating. I wasn't bringing business to the table. I was purely on operations and kind of the marketing side of the company. And at that time, we didn't need operations or marketing. We needed sales because everything, just the bottom fell out from under us. Mm-hmm. Rates were still relatively high. Values on properties went down, especially in neighborhoods where I was servicing a lot of clients. We saw 50, 60% declines because a lot of the customers that I was servicing, they went to new neighborhoods that were just being developed, like Round Lake that had nothing, and then all of a sudden they were building, $200,000 homes that went up in value to $400,000. So when the crash happened and wiped them out the most, where these $400,000 homes became $150,000.
That's crazy.
Wow.
So our not entire, but 70% of our customer base disappeared for all intents and purposes. There's nothing they can do. It was, they were just deciding if it makes sense to even keep the house or to just do a cash for keys and work themselves out of that house. Hmm. So I had to make a decision if I'm going to go back to originating. Going back to originating meant that I had to build my pipeline, figure out exactly what to do. And I thought to myself, I'm going to start from the beginning. This is my chance to explore other opportunities and see what else is out there. And, fast forward 10 years, looking back at it now, I have mixed feelings of the decision that I made. On the one hand, a lot of people that stuck it out, that stayed in the industry, saw a lot of opportunity in 2010, 2011 as rates dropped, as all the people that shouldn't have been in the industry left the industry, as you had people that were doing anything, where we're driving cabs, we're manicurists, and by the way, we also do mortgages. All of those people left the industry. So the people that stayed and that really stuck it out were able to build pretty substantial businesses. So that's the bad part of my decision, I think, is I missed on that opportunity to really build up, what is it? Where there's fire, there's opportunity. So I missed that part of it. On the other hand, if I didn't leave, I wouldn't have had a different perspective on the industry. I was very entrenched in it. It was all very transactional. And that was my one, I didn't have another vantage point. That was it. So getting out of it and spending 10 years out of it gave me a new perspective on what it is that I could now contribute to the industry as a whole, to real estate overall. And I feel that it's working out well right now.
What did you do over those 10 years?
What was that first decision after you're like, okay, I'm going to leave the industry? Like, how did you get, was that when you started Paradigm, or what was the first thing that you?
No, Paradigm was also born out of necessity. I got into a startup right away. A friend of mine came to me and said that his brother-in-law, I believe, was working for Lightbank, and Lightbank was the VC behind Groupon. And this is Groupon before they hit it big, before the IPO, but they're already establishing themselves. And he gave me some feedback and said there's a lot of opportunity in the deal space, and the problem at that time with Groupon was that it was a daily deal. So, you're in Wicker Park and today's deal is teeth whitening in South Loop. That's the deal. It doesn't do much for the consumer if they're looking to get a sandwich right now in Wicker Park. And It doesn't do that much for the dentist in South Loop, because he's going to get this guy that's going to drive in from Wicker Park, but he's not getting a regular customer. All he got to do was give away a product.
Yeah.
So we decided to launch a new app that was going to be location and category centric. So if you're looking for a sandwich in Wicker Park right now, that's what you're going to get. And for the business, they were able to kind of ratchet up and ratchet down their business as needed. So if they see they're having a slow lunch, they push a deal live, the people in that location get that deal. We did extremely well on being able to sign up merchants. We signed up over 650 merchants in the first 6 months. Nice. Which was a monumental feat to be able to achieve that without having the Groupon's funding, and it was all just us hitting the street and getting out there and signing them up, because it's a chicken and egg. What comes first, the customers or the deals? And as you're signing up these deals, they have to be selling, otherwise they leave the platform. So we had to really get it done as quickly as possible. Where I failed at leading this is I knew absolutely nothing about technology, zero. And I brought in people, vendors and third parties to build technology. I hired people that I had no business hiring, because me interviewing them, whatever they told me, fine, seemed logical. And we just failed miserably on technology. What should have taken us 6 months to have an MVP, a minimum viable product, took us over a year. What I was told it would do, it didn't do, and just going back and forth and burning through cash. And we weren't raising funds; it was self-funded. Back to the mortgage days, just burned through a ton of cash, and really couldn't get it going. So we went through several iterations of it, with the final one being a platform for bloggers to be able to monetize their following by launching their own deal sites. So with that one, we were finally able to exit out of it. We sold it. It wasn't one of those exits that you could be proud of. It was an exit where
survived.
It was survival exit. It was I hedged my losses at best. But at that time, I realized that I'm not the only one in this boat. I have a lot of friends that are in business that are realizing in 2010 that they need to have more technology. They need to have more of a social presence. They need to have more of a content strategy, and none of them knew where to start. And whoever did start ran into the same problem of just hiring the wrong people, constantly being over budget, constantly being over time. The development world, the software development world, and business people, I feel like, talk two different languages.
Oh yeah, totally.
They're just monumental. It's not a technical thing. It's just they're seeing things from two different perspectives completely. So what I started doing initially was I was translating, going back to my roots. I was literally translating what are the business needs to the developers and the marketing people and the content people. This is what the business is actually trying to achieve. And then translating back to the business people how it's going to be achieved, how long it's going to take, how it needs to be planned out to avoid that scope creep and so forth. And I was doing that, and it started to really pick up. We started to bring in clients, but I didn't have the execution. The reason I didn't have the execution is because, first of all, I have absolutely zero aesthetic sense. I don't know how to make things look good. At that time, my wife had a magazine. It was called Status. And in 2011, she ended up selling Status to a much larger media company out of New York. And she came on board just kind of to see what is it that I'm up to and to see if she could lend a hand while she was figuring out what to do. Suddenly, with her coming on board, we were able to, provide solutions, not just advice. She was able to say, let's design this, let's put this together. This site, it's not looking the way it should, it's not going to engage customers. And she brought a lot of that perspective to where we figured out that maybe it's time to start building out our own team as opposed to just recommending out. And that was kind of the start of Paradigm Next. So it grew organically out of my failure in the deal space.
Well, no, that's pretty cool, because my question was going to be, out of that situation, that experience, what was the biggest takeaway out of that? But because a lot of people just think, I fail, and this didn't work, I got to go back to something else or choose something different. But if you didn't fail, you wouldn't have learned how to, because you use your failure and utilize that in your next venture to make that one successful. Right? Or
yes. So I learned a ridiculous amount in that experience, but I think any success that I will ever have in my life will be attributable to that experience. The reason being, the main thing that I learned is while I was in the mortgage industry, I started out very, very young. Young people have a lot of ego. Young people that succeed at anything have exponentially more ego. So while I was in the mortgage industry and while I had my company, I decided for myself that I am the smartest person in the room, and just in general. And I really ran the company and everything around me in that fashion. And a lot of times I was by my own choice, because the people I surrounded myself with. When I went into the deal space, I went into it with the same mindset that, I got this, I'll figure it out. The one thing that I learned that will guide every decision I make from now on is to surround myself with the right people before doing anything. Is to surround myself with people that I could learn from. That the adage of, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Right.
100%. And in the deal space, I should have started from that. I should have started with talking to people, with finding the right mentors, with building that team before hiring anyone, before writing a single line of code, before going out to sell anything. I needed to get outside perspective. So as a result of that, anything that I've done from there on out, I always started from that as a baseline, that I need to have the right people, I need to have the right advice. And it's not people that work for me or partners, but it's everybody. It's the entire ecosystem. It's any kind of partners, any kind of vendors, any kind of mentors. I need to surround myself with the right people. And that's been now, a lifelong pursuit that will continue for as long as I'm around.
That's the common theme we've gotten on the show, is that just mentorship and finding people, if you want to do something, find somebody that's already done it and learn from them, as opposed to going, copy genius instead of try to create mediocrity. Even with us now, for instance, if we're going to go into even another sector of say real estate that we haven't done before, we don't just say, okay, we know so much about all this other stuff about real estate, so we're going to do this. If we're going to go from single family to multifamily, we're going to find someone who already has success doing multifamily, because there's just things that you don't know that you need to know. So by following someone else, you know about those red flags.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, and another phrase that explains that the exact same way is that dumb people learn off their own mistakes, smart people learn off of others. I had been dumb for a really long time. I still continue to do it occasionally, but I try to be smart as much as possible, and to learn from people's mistakes, their successes, and get them into the general orbit.
When did you decide to come back into the mortgage business and start HAUS?
About 3 years ago was when the thought kind of started to come up. So a lot of my friends for over the years have been telling me, why aren't you coming back to this industry? And I was always telling them that I was really enjoying what I was doing. Then I was working with a client on the consulting side. They were in the transportation logistics industry, and they grew up in that business. It was a family business. They grew up in that business. I knew the advice that I was giving them. I knew that it would help their business, but I was always in awe when I was in the room with them of just their general knowledge of their industry, because of that's all, that's all they know, but they grew up in it. They know every single in and out. They know every single person in the industry. They know all the changes that have happened over the years. And I didn't have that deep knowledge of any one industry within which I was consulting. Mm-hmm. So I knew what they needed to do to grow. I knew what they needed for their digital presence and for their marketing, but I didn't have that understanding of the business. And that's when the thought kind of started tumbling around, thinking that what if I took what I know here and actually applied it to something where I have much, much deeper knowledge? Mm. And that's when I kind of started looking back at the mortgage industry.
Okay.
And when did BizCast, how that play? When did that enter?
So that was a little bit before that, probably about a year before that. Going back to mentors, one of my mentors and one of Jana's, my wife's mentors, brought this opportunity to the table. And it was a friend of his that was she ended up getting another opportunity, and she was walking away from BizCast. And he came to us and he asked if it was something that we'd be interested in. So I looked at it. As a business, it didn't really have much, but it was around for a year. It had interviewed over 100 middle market CEOs by that time. They had published those videos to NBC's website. So there was the baseline for a story. And when Glenn and I, the mentor, and Glenn and I talked, Glenn said that, if you're on board with this, I'm interested in doing this. If not, then it's just time to let it go. I looked at it and said, it's definitely something that's worth giving a shot. So the first thing that I did is I knew that I needed to find a media partner, because NBC, that relationship had died with the original BizCast, because the video the content wasn't engaging enough. The viewers weren't watching it, and NBC is a media company. They need people to watch the videos, so for it to make sense. I got on LinkedIn, started reaching out to everybody across the board, from the CEO of Forbes and Inc. and Entrepreneur and so forth. Entrepreneur was the first one to respond and said, you should have a conversation with my digital people. I talked to the digital people. They liked the direction of where we're going. They hated the content as much as NBC did, and for good reason. It wasn't that great. But they really helped us. They connected us with their editorial team. And
what direction were you taking it from where it was before?
First, I needed to find a media partner before even any direction. It was Entrepreneur that helped us set that direction. It was their editorial team that said, you know what, stop doing promotional videos. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about a guy that's going to get up there and say, this is who I am, this is what I do, and this is why you should use us. People need to pay for this to get it out there. Nobody's going to watch it themselves. This is push advertising in its purest form. Why don't you try thought leadership? Right now, the marketplace is changing. People are looking at their partners, at their employers. They're not looking at them as the guy that'll pay the most. They're looking at it as thought leaders, as somebody that's going to contribute to my personal growth, as somebody that's involved in the community, that's involved in the ecosystem, that's giving back.
Almost.
Yeah. So where Entrepreneur helped guide the direction of BizCast was to create these thought leadership videos and to establish these middle market leaders as true leaders that go beyond just their organization and are able to help others that are looking at the space. Okay. So it kind of then somewhat organically evolved from there. And to date, we've interviewed over 800 middle market CEOs in Chicagoland, which is about 20% of the total landscape. We've met some fascinating people, heard some great stories, have seen a lot of companies really evolve as we talk to them. When we talk to them the first time, they're just finding out where they're at, to suddenly they're hitting all the milestones, to suddenly they're getting bought out by the Kellogg's of this world and so forth for $1 billion+ exits.
Nice.
We've had a couple of people we've had the opportunity to interview multiple times, where they've been in multiple projects, where they had their exits, started over, came back around, and did it again. And that's really cool. Yeah. And just to see that evolution. And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
How often are the interviews?
So we hold interview sessions every 2 weeks. We invite 5 CEOs per session. It's about a 2-hour session, and we are doing 20 a month total. And
it's all separate, or you interview them at the same time?
So we get 5 together in a room. For the past year, we've been doing this at the Metropolitan Club at the Sears Tower. We have 5 industry leaders get together. they're networking for about 2 hours, kind of hanging out. They're very like-minded individuals.
So providing value to them too, not just the interview. They get to meet other CEOs.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's awesome.
And then they get called in one at a time into the studio, where we do the video for about 20 to 30 minutes. That gets boiled down to about 3 to 4 minutes of actual footage. As far as the networking, we try to invite people from completely different industries. Right when we started, we thought it would be a great idea to invite people from one industry so they have something to talk about. That was horrible.
It's like cats in a room.
It was horrible. That nobody talked to each other. Nobody wanted to share anything. Now we'll have the CEO of the Shed Aquarium with the CEO of DeVry, with somebody from Exelon and so forth. Completely different perspectives, but when they get down to it, they realize they've overcome almost the same challenges, the same hurdles, the same team staffing, a lot of the same problems in their career, but now they're able to share it and hear from different perspectives in different industries how it was overcome, how those challenges were kind of overcome, and it's been a lot more fruitful for everyone.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. So Paradigm Next came out of necessity for yourself, and then how did that evolve and then take on other clients?
So over time, it's gone through several iterations. At first, when we got into it, we started working with a lot of startups, just because that's where we had a foothold. That's where we had understanding of what's going on. We ourselves had judged at the fund conference, at Tech Week. We had presented at South by Southwest Interactive. So we're really entrenched in that industry. There were certain challenges to working with startups, and we felt that we weren't particularly aligned to overcome those challenges. And a lot of it were just personality challenges. A lot of startup founders are younger, and they haven't yet, they're me 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They still think that they know everything, so they're not looking for advice as much.
As much as they should have.
Yeah.
Should have.
And to continue to do. So that kind of grew into us focusing more on companies that have had challenges, that have overcome them, that have brought in the right people in the past, that if they bring someone in, they're going to kind of listen to some of their advice. And that's where we pivoted towards middle market, which is why BizCast was such a good play for us and well aligned. That now we're only servicing clients that are in the B2B space, so we don't do anything with consumer direct, and we've really honed in on the categories we focus on. So it's predominantly manufacturing, transportation, logistics, and professional services. Okay. So those three on the B2B side, that's really our strength.
And then what makes HAUS different than all the other mortgage companies out there?
When I got back into the industry, I looked at everything that was happening, and I realized that very little had changed from the time that I left. So when I left, that was the year that the iPhone came out, and everything else, yeah, everything else had changed. Everything around everything, the way that we conduct business had changed. Mm-hmm. Mortgage really hadn't. The software that was running it was the same software that I was using when I left, was the same software that I was using when I got into it when I was 16. You would think there would be more evolution. The way that the market was working, it was the same thing. Nobody had gone back to try to look at the process. A lot of new regulation came out over the time that I was gone, and they took a process that wasn't that good to begin with and layered it with extra steps to make it worse. The way that the relationships were working, the way that referral partnership relationships were working, also nothing changed. It was the same thing. It was, let me print your flyers, let me bring bagels, let me sponsor an event for you. Yeah. There was no value creation.
That doesn't really do anything either.
I like bagels.
Bagels are great. I mean, don't take it away. But it doesn't create any value. You're shifting it from one pocket to another.
Yeah.
And I saw an opportunity there. I saw an opportunity to, first of all, internally improve the process, the way that we function. So a lot of money has gone into technology for compliance. Like truly, that was the biggest obstacle for banks to overcome in 2010. So a lot of automation, a lot of processes were improved on compliance. But nobody really looked at the front of house automation, at how do we make processors work better with loan officers? How do we keep loan officers more engaged? How do we get them the information they need so customers know what's going on? How, all of these steps. How do we streamline the process so they're not looking for emails that were sent to them a month ago? How do we make it more consumer friendly without going over the top where You have some banks where it's all online, 800 number all the way, and then you have some brokers where it's all in their office, and that's the only way you can interact. How do you bridge that gap? How do you make it so you could work with different demographics? How do you make your processors, your loan officer assistants' time more efficient so you can reduce the cost? The cost of manufacturing a loan, since that's the one thing that changed since 2009, is that the cost to put together a loan has ballooned, 700-800%.
What is it at? What was it at now?
So according to NAMB, it's about $8,700, just over $8,700 to put together a loan.
Just paperwork and all that stuff.
Exactly. And it's absolutely just an insane number. And obviously, and this is in any business, it's not the fault, it's not anybody's fault, but the consumers at the end have to pay for it. Their rates have to be higher, their fees have to be higher, so that bank could continue lending. If they don't make that $8,700, they won't be able to continue lending, and that's not exactly a win either. So it wasn't about reducing cost, it was improving efficiencies. And I feel that the last 10 years of seeing how startups are run, how things are done differently in that space, how they're able to do a lot more with a lot less, and applying it to this business and having the opportunity to do it from the beginning. I think it's difficult for a lot of businesses that have been doing it for 10, 20 years to suddenly just change their process to append everything they've done, because they're changing something existing. Having a chance to think it through from the beginning and build around it from the start, I think is kind of what differentiates us.
What did you guys reduce the costs to?
So currently we're running at about $750 per loan. By the
10%.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And hoping to do it to go further. And it's a reduction in efficiency. It's a reduction in time that we're sitting on these files. I think the average closing time right now, and there's multiple stories, so I'm guessing it's about 40 days. We're at about 22 days. It's great for realtors. It's great for customers. But at the end of the day, it's 40 days of people touching the file. It's 40 days that somebody's billing for it. It's 40 days that somebody's getting paid for it. Reducing that down to 20.
How do you guys communicate internally then to kind of reduce that time? Because the way you said it was done before was just from emailing somebody else, then email you back, then you got to email the customer, then you got to email them, and then the processor. And how did you guys reduce that time frame?
So internally, I brought in a software that I was using on the marketing side and that a lot of startups are using called Slack. There are others out there like it, but Slack it's worked great for me in the past.
It works amazing. We use Slack for everything. Yeah.
And you guys are the anomaly in this. Not a lot of people in this space are using Slack. So we brought in Slack to where now every single customer has their own channel. Only the people involved with that customer are on that channel. All
Right.
communication is kept centralized with. There's a cover page that goes into that we've built into Slack that goes in to open up the channel that everybody could always refer back to. There are links in there to where all the documents are, to application, to everything is in one place. There's no reason to go anywhere else to communicate. And that streamlined the communication between loan officers and internal teams. And reduce time.
Because then just looking back at chain emails, it's like you can never find anything. Or like trying to search a text message that you sent them 6 months ago. Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, and so that's our internal system. We also use systems for the way we collect documents. Again, borrowers are able to either upload them to a secure portal. They're able to link up their bank so we can get the information right away. Again, there's nothing new that what we're doing here. There's other banks that are doing this. The flip side of that is they could come to our office. The middle ground is I'll use Uber as a courier to send out an Uber driver to pick up documents, scan them in, bring them back. So there's multiple options of what we can do to make sure that the customer is being served right. And not just being served right, but that Uber solution further reduces costs because that's 3 extra calls we don't have to make to the borrower. That's a lock that's not lost at the end of this transaction that has to be paid for. If we're able to get the documents, get them into the bank that much faster, get the file clear to close and closed out, reduces costs on our side, which we could then pass on to the customers.
Nice. It's a brilliant idea. You said only like 1 or 2 people have ever used that, right? The Uber?
Yeah, so the Uber suggestion, I always put it out there, and it's not used. I mean, it's used the way that I thought it would be used, but not its intended purpose. Usually, when people see that we're willing to go out of our way and work with them and cater to them, they'll say, "Don't worry about it. Let me figure out how to upload it," and suddenly the upload becomes super easy.
Well, no, that's what it's more about. Is that you're willing to go the extra mile. You're showing that you're willing to go the extra mile and provide value and do anything, whatever it takes to for the customer. So in turn, they're like, "Oh, they want to reciprocate, and then they get the file in that much faster.
Yeah, and we're always looking for stuff like that. Always looking to see how we can help the process and the customer, and usually it's got other effects that end up coming from it. Such as in this case with Uber, we're showing how we're a better servicer without actually doing a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, just the fact that you offer it.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to go into the questions now. Have you ever turned down a client? I'm sure you have, and why?
Absolutely. I've turned down clients, and another thing that I learned along the way. So for years, I wasn't turning down clients. I was chasing down every single client. Every single client was a revenue opportunity, and there was no reason not to lose them. Years ago, I started turning away clients that didn't fit with me on a personality level. That didn't fit. If they were rude to me or any of my staff, that was an instant kind of the disqualification, just not worth working together. If I didn't think that they should be, and this is, right now there's regulation around it, so it's a little bit different now. Now, if a person shouldn't be in a home, there's regulation that'll prevent them from going into a home.
Right.
Go back to 2005, there was no regulation. Anybody could get a home, anybody can qualify for anything with no money, anybody can do it. If I saw that this person was not going to be able to afford their home, I didn't want to be a part of that. I didn't want, because losing a home is a little bit different than losing a car. You lose a home, you have a family. I didn't want to be associated in their minds or anybody else's minds with the one that put them into this situation. So I've turned down customers there, but mostly it's been just a culture fit. And where I can't help, on Paradigm, I've turned down a lot of clients where I look and I don't know how I can help them. I don't have the skills, I don't have the network to be able to cater to them. And recently, a friend of mine who runs a very successful business is a security business, commercial security business, who was doing extremely well for many years, but wasn't able to kind of jump to the next level. And then suddenly he, probably 10x'd his business in a matter of about 18 months. And I asked him, what was the main thing that you did? And that was the advice. He said he started to fire clients. He started to fire clients that just weren't working, that were sucking out a lot of time. There was no appreciation, where he was outside of his comfort zone on what he was doing. And that's what allowed him to focus on the those 20% that bring in the 80% of the revenue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's a huge one.
If you had one piece of advice to someone just starting out, what would it be?
To listen. That's it. Speak less, listen more. If there's no one talking around you, go find people that talk around you. Open yourself up to understanding that you don't know everything. And even if you do, go out and get validation that you do. Go into it with that. Don't go into it questioning yourself. Go into it, I'm confident I know what I'm doing, but let's see if everybody else thinks so. Surround yourself with the right people. Listen as much as possible. Get mentors. Meet with them regularly. Run ideas by them whenever you have them. Be appreciative of the fact that they're taking time out to be your mentors, and continue to build those relationships.
Okay.
What is your best hiring tip or secret?
That culture, I think, right now is more important than skill set, especially, where this is not brain surgery. There's not something that skill set is something that really can't be taught, that has to be already ingrained. I feel that in everything that we are doing, whether it's on the marketing side or it's on the mortgage side, it can be taught. It has to be the right person, and it has to be not just the right person, but the right person for the organization. There has to be a culture fit. They have to want to be there, and the organization has to want them there. It shouldn't be around revenue. It shouldn't be purely around knowledge. Knowledge is a huge plus, but it shouldn't be the be-all, end-all. If a person fits well within the organization and they want to succeed and they want to achieve and they want to do it as part of the team, the rest of the team will come around them and they will fill whatever gaps they have on knowledge. But if you have the smartest person that knows the industry but doesn't fit, they will never succeed in that organization. So I always look for a cultural fit and for somebody that I could be friends with, somebody I can go out for a beer with, that where that makes sense. Because if we don't have that, everything else becomes a lot more difficult, becomes a lot more strained.
How do you stay motivated?
How do I stay motivated? There's so much I don't even know where to start. I mean, first of all, I need to be.
I'm always motivated. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Why not?
first of all, doing something interesting. I think the whole entrepreneurial pursuit is that fact that you're able to do something different every single day. You're able to learn something every single day. You're able to pivot and change what you're doing and see results or see failures, but then learn from those failures and hopefully in the future see results. I think that's the biggest motivation, is that I don't know exactly what tomorrow will bring, good and bad. And that keeps me motivated to always kind of to stay sharp, to keep trying, to keep doing things, to bring myself more of those experiences that I could learn from and then do it better in the future. So that's on a professional level. On a personal level, I have a wonderful, beautiful wife, a great kid, and they are a huge motivator. I'm lucky enough to be able to work with my wife. A lot of people can't pull that off. Either don't do it or can't pull it off. We've worked extremely well together, and she's been extremely motivational. She's very different than I am, so that what she brings to the table is very different. So every single problem that I have or every single success that I have, I always run it by her, and she's been a kind of a great motivator for me and seeing a different perspective. And then now the onus is on me to kind of not let her down, and the advice that she gave me for me to follow through on it so I could report back.
That's awesome.
And now we have a kid that's growing up in this ecosystem, and she's our only child, and she's been part of this entrepreneurial pursuit for this entire time. A great example is recently there's a new show being put on by Billy Marovitz at the Royal George Theatre. Next month, I think it's starting. It's about a family and about how the Cubs have played a role in their life. And Billy said that he was going to give our 8-year-old some tickets for her to promote the play, and she was going to have her own promo code out in there and so forth to get it out to the school. So when I told this to her, hearing her questions and her ideas right away, that this is an 8-year-old talking about, great, I'm going to take the tickets, I'm going to pass them out to my class, but wait, I'm going to engage the other teachers, I'm going to have them pass out to their classes. Would you mind if I went to the principal and had her announce it? What if I went to the parents and did this? And just listening to her, kind of the result of her being around us so much
awesome.
Is motivating for me, that I need to continue, that I need to continue being that person for her that brings those ideas, and that where she sees those ideas come to fruition and is interested in pursuing her own. So that's been a big kind of part of it for the last few years.
That's pretty cool. What living or dead person other than family members do you most admire?
You mentioned Gary Vee. He's one of the people, just in seeing his story, not necessarily his message or anything else, and there's no one thing about him, but seeing how he was able to take an immigrant-started business that was, a retail business. It was a liquor store. Like, how do you turn a liquor store into a content strategy mastermind? And seeing that he was able to take it, seeing how he was able to put content into it, and seeing how he was able to apply different thinking to an industry where you couldn't possibly apply it. And the successes that he's had over the years, and how many, at this time point, millions of people follow him and watch him and engage, and how Fortune 500 companies are hiring him to give him advice when the advice stems from how do you build a content strategy for a liquor store. So that's just extremely inspirational to see that evolution.
Darren, if you've been following him, and he started VaynerMedia, and if you've been following him for the last few years, he started he talks about having 100 employees, then 200, then a few months later it's 400, then it's 500, and it's just you just see his organization just blowing up in the last 5 years.
If you're able to have that outside perspective, if you're able to bring something to a place where it doesn't exist, that's the success. And it started from liquor store. Obviously, it's gone far beyond that now, but it's because of the kind of the mindset that he has.
He actually, I was just listening to one of his episodes the other day. Just a quick sidebar. He was talking about to go back and look at some of because he's talking about the way that Fortune 500s or big companies are trying to market on social media, right? And he says they're doing it completely wrong because they're doing TV commercials, but for social media. And then he goes back and he's go back and look at the first 100 TV ads and how they were literally just a picture with somebody reading it. So technically it was a radio ad, but it was just a picture, and they were reading it if it was made for radio. So he just talks about how you should be marketing completely different on social media because it's a total different new thing. I don't know. I thought it was pretty funny that he said that.
And at this point, I would say even goes to the next level. So he's talking about content. The content is king, and then the content strategy is important. I think we're now at the next evolution. So how we went from somebody reading it on TV and doing a radio commercial on TV to now they're doing TV commercials on social. I think we're at a point right now to where we're going beyond social. Content, while important, is no longer relevant because there's so much of it out there, and we're being bombarded with it in every which way, from social media to podcasts to in every direction we're getting content. So I think right now we're at the next stage of kind of that marketing evolution to where it's more conversational marketing as opposed to content marketing. You got to engage people to talk back to you. More so than pushing out content where
all about attention.
All about attention and engagement. About again, going back to at this point, content is you still talking. I think we've come to a point in the way that we market and the connection that we have with our customers to where we could market through listening. And it's no longer focus groups that, based on this 100 people that we interviewed, this is what these 10,000 people want to hear from us.
I always thought that was so weird.
But it's actually hearing from the person. And where we're at with technology today, where we're at with engagement, it's possible. So I think we need to even skip a step. So those that are right now pushing out TV commercials on social media, they need to not just find their content strategy, but they could skip over that and find an engagement and a listening platform.
I like that. Oh, what habits help make you successful?
Systems and processes are huge. So I try to have a process for as much of what I do as possible. Everything from time blocking to achieve certain tasks to not jumping ahead of myself and doing something that's the next step, but really focusing in on what I'm doing now. To be laser focused on what I'm doing. I try not to jump around into, it's tough to say after everything I've just said, but I try not to jump around into different businesses and into different opportunities. Being in business, you're surrounded by other people that are in business. As a result of it, on a daily basis, you have some opportunity that comes to you. And, I think it was Warren Buffett amongst, I'm sure, a slew of others that have said that it's knowing which opportunities to say no to is the real key to success. So I say no to probably 95% of the opportunities that come across my desk that I hear about, either because I don't see myself really lending a hand and providing value, but more importantly, it'll shift my focus. So I really try to focus in on what I'm doing now, becoming really good at it, and getting it to a point to where somebody else could maybe manage the process going forward, allowing me to focus on something else, but definitely not stepping away from it while it's still in its infancy.
You say you have processes and systems in place, an organization. Were you always like that, or is that something you almost had to make out of necessity by having multiple businesses? And then, what's the best way that anything that you can reference for people that are out there that may be struggling with that, or how to get everything in place into systems?
Absolutely. So, I think I've been like that most of my life. I've been process focused. I've really tried to have a system for what I do as opposed to just kind of jumping into it. Everything from, I was always, whenever I have to write a paper, it wouldn't be because the teacher said so, but I would be the one that would always lay out the outline and then go and build on top of it. So I've taken that essay writing methodology to everything I do in business. I always lay out an outline, break up the steps on what are the steps that I need to achieve. I put them, kind of make a list for myself on what I will do and when. Time blocking is super important. Setting aside time to where you're doing only this, to where you're not looking at Slack anymore, you're not looking at messages, you're not looking at email, you're laser focused. Everybody talks about, well, not anymore, but before people talked about how, I can multitask, and that's one of my biggest attributes. You might be able to do it, but your brain can't. Our brains are not wired to multitask. All that multitasking does is you take focus away from one thing that you're laser focused on, and now you're kind of half-assed focused on 2, 3, 4 things. I think that's super important to really hone in on what you're doing, focus on it, get it done, move on to the next task. They say that every time you try to switch tasks, it takes you about 20 minutes just to get back to the original thing you were thinking of. Not to even mention just the value lost and where you were in the thought process, but purely on time, on catching up on where is it that I left off. A recent discovery that I made about a month ago. I have a huge, I think it's, I want to say 40 or 49-inch monitor in my office, which you guys have seen.
This is so wild.
Curved monitor.
And
you can put 1 million tabs on that thing.
And that's the problem. And I thought it was absolutely awesome. I've been kind of moving from, the 220-inch monitors to the 34-inch monitor to the 49-inch monitor. And about a month ago, I went out and I got the new iPad Pro. my efficiency has gone up exponentially.
Because you could only fit like one little...
I have one thing on my screen, I get through it, I move on to the other. Otherwise, on my normal screen, I have an internet browser with 30, 40 tabs. I have my email, I have Slack, I have some kind of a chat open up, usually either it's a Podium or an SMS or something. And as I'm doing one thing, I get a Slack message that comes in. I have a notification that comes in. It shifts my focus. Even if I don't do anything about it, but now it's in the back of my mind, oh, and by the way, I have to respond back to that person or do this, and it changes my focus. Having this iPad has been an absolute godsend. Like, I'm focusing in on one thing, I get it out, I get so much more done in a day as a result of it, that this has been a recent discovery.
iPads for everybody.
I'm telling you.
iPads for everybody.
What do you wish you knew before you got started?
The important, I mean, it's the same thing that I've been kind of driving home, the importance of having people around. I should have focused more on those mentors. One of the not problems, but going all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, the whole immigrant roots. I didn't have time for a lot of the stuff that everybody else was doing. I didn't have time for the internships that kids were doing. You go out and you do these free internships.
Yeah.
At that time, I was already working, and at that time, by college, I was already making pretty good money. The amount that it's cost me is 100 times more than whatever I was making. Because right now we have a lot of, we've had a lot of interns work with us. And I'm seeing these kids, these really smart, ambitious kids come in. They know the education component. They've never really worked, in a business. And, they might intern with us for 3 months. In 3 months, they're walking out completely different people. Because they got to be a part of a business. They got to see how things run. They got to see certain processes. They got to see certain problems. They got to solve them.
Yeah.
They have a completely different understanding and a completely different, they now know that they can achieve things. And them going out into the world after doing an internship with us and a few others is completely different people when they go out into the world. I feel like I should have taken advantage of those opportunities more. I feel that would have built up those mentors, because the people I would have interned for would have become my mentors. It would have been a huge driver for success. So any kids out there, college students, take the time, go do internships. It's well worth it.
We're hiring for interns right now for a variety of different things, so reach out to us.
Why do you do what you do, and what gets you through the tough times?
I'm curious. That's what gets me through the tough times. I want to see what's on the other end. I don't usually give up on things. If it's a tough time, then it's a challenge. And I try to get through it just out of curiosity to see how I can get out of it and what I can take away from it. Walking away from it doesn't do anything,
True.
People asked Tim Cook why he stayed on Trump's Economic Council after everything that was happening. And he said, because at least I get to be in the room. I get to hear what's going on. I get to have a voice.
Yeah.
So the tough times, walking away from the tough times, is taking your voice out of the equation. So that's been a driver.
What was the worst piece of advice that you ever got?
I can't say there was any bad advice, honestly. It's what I did with the advice that I think is a bigger problem than the advice that was given. Any advice that was given, somebody took the time to give me the advice. I just needed to take it contextually and so forth. I don't really think there's any piece of bad advice that I've had.
Interesting. Do you have a morning routine?
I do. The first thing that I do, is usually with just one eye open, is I'll run through Slack. I want to make sure that by the time people get into the office, that anything that's on me, that I'm not the one slowing the people down. They say that as a leader, people don't work for you, you work for them.
Right.
And it's 100% true. If I don't answer their questions, if I don't set them up right, then nothing will get accomplished, and it's completely my fault.
You're almost setting him up for failure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the morning, I'll always run through Slack, make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. If there's anything that kind of where I'm holding them back, where I'm the bottleneck on the process, I want to solve that, get that out of the way. Then typically I'll spend about a half an hour on industry knowledge. There's a couple of blogs that I follow, a couple of videos that I get, and newsletters and so forth. So typically in the morning, I'll run through those. I'll make sure that I know what's going on for the day. I'll share that content with any people, relevant people, usually through Slack, to make sure that they know what I know now. And then from there, I'll typically start my day.
Nice.
That's before anybody gets up in the house.
What time do you get up?
5:30.
Nice.
Yeah. I went to, my sister lives in Australia, and I was visiting them once when I was like 13 years old, and her husband was writing his PhD paper at the time. And I was sleeping in their office. They had a 1-bedroom condo, so I was sleeping in his office. And at night, he would sit there and he would write his dissertation until 2 o'clock in the morning. He'd be back there at 5:30, 6 o'clock. And he kept waking me up. And I asked him, why are you doing this to me? For no other reason. And he explained, and then he is... so right now he's a world-renowned scientist. At that time, he was striving to be a world-renowned scientist. And he said that our body, as an adult, not for kids, but as an adult, we need 4 to 5 hours of sleep to be, to get everything that we need to move on. He said we have 24 hours in a day. Sleeping for 8 hours means we're sleeping for a third of our life. And that really resonated with me. And since then, I don't know, I think it was just a shift that happened, that at this point, I don't have alarm clocks. It's the worst thing for me is to have to wake up with an alarm clock. That kills my day completely.
What time do you go to sleep?
Around 1, 2. 1. Yeah.
Nice.
Again, because the kid goes to sleep at 9, and you want to spend some time with the wife, not talking about work.
Yeah.
There's a last question. What happened to it?
You lost it. He actually kind of answered it, but I'll bring it up anyways.
Go ahead.
Do you have a favorite failure, or is it one that set you up for future success?
I would say the mortgage company. I would say the mortgage industry, that when the mortgage industry started to fail, I failed within it. And that was the opportunity for me to look at everything differently than everything I'd been doing before. Had that not failed, I might have been successful in mortgage. I'm not taking that away. I think it would have continued to move forward. I don't think I would have failed. I think I would have succeeded at it. I think I would have been a different person. Just mentally, I think I would have been a different person. I think I would have, a different set of friends. I think I would have a different wife. I think my life would have gone different had it not been for that failure. So I think that was, because it started young, I didn't have a chance to fail younger. So when it failed, I was still in a position to really change everything, the way that I do things, the way that I think about things. It happened early enough, and it was big enough to where it was, everything I knew and 10 years of doing it, and then suddenly, poof, it was gone. And there was no other opportunity. It wasn't like I closed the company and then go work for someone else. At that time, everybody was struggling. There was no fallback. And having to reimagine and rethink everything was definitely a monumental failure that proved to be a really kind of big turning point in my life.
Okay. Where can people find your different businesses, like the BizCast and Paradigm NEXT and HAUS?
So our main office right now is in Northbrook, so northwest suburbs of Chicago. We have satellite offices in Hyde Park as well as in the Loop. Otherwise, websites are a good starting point, or any social media. You could look up Paradigm NEXT, BizCast HQ, and HAUS Mortgage.
I'll put them up on the links.
Perfect.
Cool. Yes. Awesome. Thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for giving us your time.
Yeah,
that's great.
Till next time. And that's it for another episode of the podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. One last thing before you head off, though. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us your thoughts on iTunes. It would really mean a lot and help us reach more people. You can also find us on Facebook at Profits Over Wages Podcast, as well as on Instagram and YouTube. Until next time.